My brother stole my bride a week before the wedding. That's the best thing he ever did for me. I remember being 28. Life felt like one of those bank commercials where everything's perfect. Blue skies, successful career, bank account in the black. I believed in fairy tales, in true love, in the whole American dream package. Man, was I an optimistic fool. You know that feeling when you think you've got everything figured out? When your biggest worry is whether to get the premium cable package or stick with basic. That was me, living in my bubble of blissful ignorance, thinking I had caught lightning in a bottle. I was working at this mid-tier consulting firm in Chicago. Nothing fancy, but steady. The kind of job where you wear khakis on Fridays and feel rebellious. My apartment was decent. 2 bedrooms, one of which I turned into what I generously call my home office, but was really just a room where I stored Amazon boxes and pretended to work out. Life was predictable. Safe. Boring, if I'm being honest. I had my routine down to a science. Coffee at 6:30, gym at 7, work by 8:30, happy hour on Thursdays with the guys from accounting who thought discussing their 401k contributions was peak entertainment. Then Olivia happened. She walked into that coffee shop on Michigan Avenue like she owned the place. You know those women who just command attention without trying? That was her. Blonde hair that caught the morning light. Smile that could sell you a timeshare in Antarctica, and this energy that made everyone else in the room feel like background extras in her movie. I was standing there like an idiot, fumbling with my wallet, when she bumped into me. Her latte went flying, landing all over my supposedly dry-clean-only shirt. Most people would apologize profusely. Olivia just laughed, this genuine, infectious laugh that made my chest tighten in ways I didn't understand. She was like a firework, bright, loud, and the kind of thing you want to stay away from but can't stop watching. There was something magnetic about her chaos, something that pulled you in even when your brain was screaming warnings. Our first conversation lasted 3 hours. We talked about everything and nothing. Her job in marketing, my boring consulting gig, her dreams of traveling to places with unpronounceable names, my embarrassing collection of vintage baseball cards. She listened like every word mattered, asked questions that made me feel interesting for the first time in years. When she left, I realized I'd been holding my breath for most of our conversation. The whirlwind started immediately. 3 dates in the first week. Phone calls that lasted until 2 a.m. Text messages that made me grin like a teenager during important client meetings. Everything moved at warp speed, like we were filming a romantic comedy on fast forward. Looking back, maybe that should have been my first red flag. But when you're caught in a hurricane of attention and affection, you don't question the wind patterns. You just hold on and enjoy the ride. Within 2 months, she was practically living at my place. Her stuff started appearing everywhere. Expensive face creams in my bathroom, designer clothes in my closet, fancy wine glasses that made my Target dinnerware look like camping gear. She transformed my bachelor pad into something that belonged in a home and garden magazine. I loved it. I loved feeling like I was part of something bigger than my mundane routine. Olivia brought color to my black and white existence. Sometimes, though, late at night when she was sleeping beside me, I get this weird feeling in my gut, like when you're watching a magic trick and you know something's not right, but the magician is so good you can't figure out what. I'd lie there staring at the ceiling, trying to put my finger on what was bothering me. Love is blind, they say. Mine was apparently deaf and dumb, too. The proposal happened 6 months in. I know. Everyone told me it was too fast. My buddy Jake said I was moving quicker than a NASCAR driver on Red Bull. But when you know, right? At least that's what I told myself as I dropped $3,000 on a ring that made my credit card weep. I planned this elaborate proposal at Navy Pier. Sunset, boat ride, the whole romantic playbook. When I got down on one knee, she said yes before I could even finish my rehearsed speech. Her eyes lit up like Times Square on New Year's Eve. Planning the wedding became my second full-time job. Olivia had opinions about everything. And I mean everything. The napkin color apparently made the difference between a magical celebration and a complete disaster. Who knew beige could be so controversial? That's where my brother David really stepped into the picture. David was my best man, my built-in wedding consultant, and my reality check all rolled into one. 2 years older than me, married to his college sweetheart Sarah. Father of twin boys who could destroy a room faster than a Category 5 hurricane. He was everything I aspire to be: stable, confident, the kind of guy who could fix a leaky faucet without flooding the bathroom. David had this way of making everything seem manageable. When I was stressed about flower arrangements, he'd crack a joke about how nobody remembers the centerpieces anyway. When I worried about the catering budget, he'd remind me that good food and open bar were all anyone really cared about. He offered to help with wedding prep more than I expected. At first, I thought it was just brotherly support. David was always the responsible one, the guy who remembered birthdays and anniversary dates better than a professional assistant. But looking back, there was something almost desperate about his involvement. He'd show up at our apartment with vendor suggestions, color swatches, even cake samples he claimed to have picked up just because he was in the neighborhood. The weird thing was, these places were never actually in his neighborhood. Sometimes I'd catch him staring at Olivia when he thought nobody was looking. Not the way you look at your brother's fiancée, more like the way you look at something you want but can't have. When I'd call him out on it jokingly, he'd get this nervous laugh and change the subject faster than a politician caught in a scandal. Sarah started making comments about how much time David was spending away from home. She called during our planning sessions, and I could hear the edge in her voice even through the phone. David would step outside to talk to her, and when he came back, he looked guilty about something I couldn't name. But Olivia seemed to really appreciate his input, maybe too much. She'd light up when he walked into a room, hang on his every suggestion like he was some kind of wedding planning guru. They developed inside jokes I wasn't part of, shared glances that lasted a beat too long, conversations that stopped abruptly when I walked into a room. When I mentioned it to David, he'd wave it off with that characteristic charm. They were just bonding over the stress of planning, he said. Olivia was nervous about marrying into our family, and he was helping her feel welcome. All perfectly innocent explanations that made perfect sense. My family loved Olivia. Mom treated her like the daughter she never had, constantly asking her opinion on everything from holiday decorations to family recipes. Dad, who barely spoke to anyone outside of football season, would actually initiate conversations with her about current events and her marketing campaigns. She fit into our family dynamic so seamlessly, it felt like she'd always been there. During Sunday dinners, she'd help in the kitchen, laugh at Dad's terrible jokes, and play video games with David's kids until they passed out from sugar crashes. But those puzzle pieces kept nagging at me. The way Olivia's phone would buzz with texts during dinner, and she'd glance at them with the secretive smile. How she always seemed to know what David was going to say before he said it. The fact that she started using phrases that sounded distinctly like David's vocabulary. I told myself I was being paranoid, jealous, even. What kind of person suspects their own brother and fiancé of anything inappropriate? These were the two people I trusted most in the world. 3 weeks before the wedding, I started noticing more red flags. Olivia had been working late a lot, stressed about some big campaign launch that seemed to require an unusual amount of evening meetings. David had been distant too, distracted during our conversations, checking his phone constantly like he was waiting for important news. Sarah mentioned that David had been staying late at work more often. Something about a big project. The timing seemed coincidental, but then again, I was probably reading too much into everything. That Thursday, I decided to surprise Olivia. She'd been exhausted lately, and I thought a quiet night it might be exactly what she needed. I left work early, picked up her favorite Chinese takeout from that place on State Street that charged $20 for what was essentially fancy noodles. I felt like a kid on Christmas morning, excited to do something nice for the woman I was going to marry, the woman who transformed my ordinary life into something extraordinary. I should have called first. That's what reasonable people do. They call ahead, but I wanted it to be a surprise. Surprises are romantic, right? They show thoughtfulness and spontaneity and all those qualities women's magazines say women want in a partner. The apartment was quiet when I let myself in. No TV, no music, just the kind of silence that feels heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. I figured she was napping, She'd been exhausted lately with work and wedding stress. Then I heard voices from the bedroom. Olivia's voice, and another voice I recognized immediately. A voice that belonged to someone who should have been at his own house, with his own wife and kids, not in my bedroom with my fiancée 3 weeks before our wedding. David's voice. My brain went through this weird process of denial and recognition. First, I convinced myself I was wrong. Maybe they were planning another surprise. Maybe David was helping her with something wedding-related. Maybe there was a perfectly innocent explanation for why my brother was in my bedroom with my fiancée, while I was supposed to be at work. The Chinese takeout bags suddenly felt impossibly heavy in my hands. I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds, listening to sounds that left no room for innocent explanations. My heart was beating so loud, I was surprised they couldn't hear it through the walls. Everything felt surreal, like watching a movie where you desperately want to yell at the main character to turn around and leave. But I couldn't leave. I had to know. Opening that bedroom door was like jumping off a cliff. That moment of weightlessness before gravity kicks in and you realize you're about to hit the ground hard. There they were, Olivia and David, in my bed, the bed where I'd imagined spending countless nights with my wife, maybe even bringing our future children for Saturday morning cartoons and lazy Sunday mornings. The betrayal hit me in waves. First was a visual. Seeing two people you love most in the world tangled together in sheets you bought for your shared future. Then came the emotional sledgehammer, the realization that everything you believed about your life was a lie. It felt like someone had reached into my chest and ripped out everything that mattered, then set it on fire while I watched. They noticed me at the same time. David's face went from passion to horror in about half a second. Olivia just froze, like a deer caught in headlights, except deer probably feel less guilty about their life choices. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The only sound was a Chinese takeout hitting the floor with what seemed like the loudest crash in human history. Then came the scrambling. David practically fell off the bed reaching for his clothes, muttering something about how this wasn't planned, how they'd tried to stop themselves, how sorry he was. Olivia wrapped herself in my sheets and started crying. Not the pretty, delicate tears you see in movies, but ugly, desperate sobs that sounded like they were being ripped from her chest. They both started talking at once, throwing out explanations that contradicted each other. It was an accident. It had been going on for months. It just happened today. They'd been fighting their feelings. They'd given in to temptation. They were planning to tell me after the wedding. The words washed over me like white noise. I couldn't process any of it. My brain had shut down somewhere between seeing them together and realizing that every kiss, every intimate moment, every wedding plan had been built on a foundation of lies. The worst part came when the explanation stopped and they just looked at each other. David reached out and touched Olivia's face with a tenderness I'd never seen from him before. She leaned into his hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. In that moment, I understood that this wasn't just physical betrayal. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a stupid mistake. They were in love. Really, truly, devastatingly in love with each other, and I was just the obstacle standing in their way. I could see the engagement ring glittering on her finger as she reached for David. The ring I'd been so proud to give her that it represented everything I thought we had together. I don't remember making the decision to leave. One moment I was standing in the doorway of my own bedroom, watching my entire future crumble, and the next I was running down the hallway, down the stairs, out of the building, and into the street like my life depended on it. Maybe it did. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. Found myself sitting on some random park bench, staring at nothing, trying to process what had just happened. People walked by with their normal lives, their normal problems, their intact families and functional relationships. I envied every single one of them. The phone started buzzing immediately. Text messages, missed calls, voicemails I couldn't bring myself to listen to. I could see David's name flashing on the screen, then Olivia's, then David's again. I turned it off and sat there as the sun set, wondering what the hell I was supposed to do next. My perfect life had been a house of cards, and someone had just blown it down with a hurricane of betrayal. Everything I believed about love, family, trust, and loyalty had been shattered in the span of about 30 seconds. The American dream I'd been living was somebody else's nightmare, and I was just the last to know. I didn't know what came next. I couldn't go home. I couldn't face them. I couldn't imagine explaining this to our families, our friends, the wedding guests who'd already bought plane tickets and booked hotel rooms. The world kept spinning, but mine had stopped. Everything that mattered was gone, and I was left sitting alone in the dark, wondering how someone rebuilds their entire existence from scratch. I had no idea that this moment, this awful, devastating, soul-crushing moment, would eventually become the catalyst of the best thing that ever happened to me. The world kept spinning, but mine had stopped. I sat on that park bench until the streetlights came on, trying to figure out what the hell you're supposed to do when your entire life implodes in the span of 30 seconds. My phone had been buzzing nonstop. 17 missed calls from David, 12 from Olivia, even a few from numbers I didn't recognize. Probably wedding vendors wondering where their deposits went. I couldn't bring myself to listen to any of the voicemails. Eventually, my survival instincts kicked in. I needed somewhere to go, someone to talk to, some kind of anchor in this storm. There was only one place that made sense. Home. Not my apartment, which was now contaminated with betrayal, but my childhood home. The place where problems got solved with Mom's cooking and Dad's practical wisdom. I drove the 3 hours to my parents' house on autopilot, running on fumes and pure desperation. The whole way there, I practiced what I'd say. How do you even begin to explain that your fiancée and your brother destroyed your life in one afternoon? I thought the parental home was the one place where you could hide from pain like this, where they'd understand, support you, maybe even help you figure out how to pick up the pieces. But apparently, I knocked on the wrong door. Mom answered before I could even ring the bell. Her face had that look, you know the one, the same expression she wore when she had to tell me our dog died, or when she had to deliver any other kind of bad news that would change everything. She already knew. The words tumbled out of me anyway, about the surprise, the bedroom, the betrayal, the complete destruction of everything I thought was real. But as I talked, I realized she wasn't surprised by any of it. Her reactions were too controlled, too prepared. When I finished my pathetic story, Mom just sat there fidgeting with her earring, that nervous habit she'd had since I was a kid. Dad looked like he wanted to say something profound, but ended up mumbling something about life being complicated and everyone making mistakes. That's when it hit me. They weren't just unsurprised. They were okay with it. Turns out David had already called them, explained the situation, told them how sorry he was, how it just happened, how they never meant to hurt anyone. And my parents, my own flesh and blood, had apparently decided that these things just happen sometimes. Mom actually used the phrase affairs of the heart, like we were living in some Nicholas Sparks novel, instead of dealing with the fact that my brother had been sleeping with my fiancée behind my back. This felt worse than the betrayal itself. At least David and Olivia had the excuse of being consumed by passion or whatever. But my parents, they chose neutrality when I needed them to choose me. They chose family peace over family justice. Dad kept talking about how David was torn up about it, how we needed to think about the grandkids, how families go through rough patches but always come together in the end. Like I was the one being unreasonable for not wanting to play happy families with the people who destroyed my life. I felt like I'd been written out of my own family, like someone had taken an eraser to my name in the family Bible and replaced it with a footnote about forgiveness and moving forward. The worst part was Mom asking if I considered couples counseling with Olivia, the woman who'd been cheating on me with my brother. Apparently, there were two sides to every story, and maybe I should try to understand theirs. I left that night feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. Not just betrayed by David and Olivia, but abandoned by the people who were supposed to have my back no matter what. The entire foundation of my world had cracked, and everyone was telling me to just paint over cracks and pretend everything was fine. It was like someone had pulled the rug out from under me and then asked why I was having trouble standing up. I drove back to Chicago in a daze, but I couldn't go back to my apartment. Too many memories, too much Olivia's stuff still there, too much of a life that no longer existed. So I did what any rational person does when their world ends. I checked into a Motel 6 on the outskirts of town and tried to figure out how to exist. The room smelled like industrial disinfectant and broken dreams. The wallpaper was a color of depression, and the bed creaked like a haunted house every time I moved. It was perfect. Finally, my surroundings matched my internal state. I called in sick to work the next day. And the day after that, pretty soon, I wasn't calling in at all. I'd wake up around noon, order pizza for breakfast, and spend the day channel surfing between infomercials and daytime TV that made my life look like a success story. The thing about rock bottom is that you don't realize you're falling until you hit it. And even then, you sometimes keep digging. I looked like hell, unshaven, unwashed, wearing the same clothes for days at a time. My eyes had this hollow look that comes from too little sleep and too much thinking about things you can't change. I catch glimpses of myself in the motel bathroom mirror and wonder who that pathetic stranger was. Friends stopped calling after the first week. Not that I was answering anyway. My phone sat there silent as a grave, or maybe I was the one who'd gone silent, ignoring a world that suddenly felt foreign and hostile. Sleep became my enemy. If I slept, I'd dream about them together. If I stayed awake, I'd think about them together. It was a closed loop of torture where I was both the prisoner and the warden. I started drinking more than I should have. Not socially, not for fun, but to numb the pain. It became a crutch I leaned on too heavily, and like most crutches, it only made walking hard in the long run. The alcohol helped for a while. It turned down the volume on the thoughts that wouldn't stop screaming in my head. But hangovers are nature's way of reminding you that you can't actually drink your problems away. You can only delay dealing with them while making yourself feel worse. 3 weeks into my personal apocalypse, I got the call from my boss. Well, former boss. Apparently, not showing up to work for almost a month is considered grounds for termination. Who knew? The conversation was mercifully brief. He told me he understood I was going through a difficult time, but the company had to move forward. My focus seemed as blurred as my appearance lately, and maybe it was best if I took some time to get my life together. I wanted to argue, but what was I going to say? That I was a reliable employee who just happened to be having a complete nervous breakdown? That my productivity would improve once I figured out how to stop my hands from shaking? So there I was. No job, no fiancée, no brother, no family support, and a rapidly dwindling bank account that was about as impressive as my personal hygiene routine. I was officially a walking country song, except without the truck or the dog. The eviction notice came 2 weeks later. I'd stopped paying rent on my apartment because, honestly, I'd forgotten I still had an apartment. The landlord was surprisingly understanding, probably because he'd dealt with enough human disasters to recognize the signs. I spent my last day in that place packing my life into cardboard boxes. Everything that had seemed so important a month ago now felt like props from someone else's play. The fancy coffee maker Olivia had insisted we needed, the framed photos of us looking happy and normal, the wedding planning binders that now felt like evidence of my own stupidity. Sitting on the floor surrounded by boxes, I realized I'd become exactly what I feared most, the guy who lets life happen to him instead of making life happen for him. That night, I found myself in another cheap motel, staring at my reflection in a window that had seen better decades. The person looking back at me was a stranger, pale, hollow-eyed, defeated. This wasn't who I was supposed to be at 28. I'd become a cautionary tale, the kind of guy people point to when they want to explain why you shouldn't put all your eggs in one basket. But something strange happened in that moment of complete self-recognition. Something clicked. Maybe it was hitting bottom so hard I bounced, or maybe it was finally running out of ways to feel sorry for myself. But looking at that reflection, I realized I had a choice. I could stay this broken version of myself forever, or I could decide that this wasn't my ending. It was just a really dramatic plot twist. The realization wasn't some Hollywood moment with swelling music and a montage of self-improvement. It was quieter than that, more like a light switch flipping on in a dark room, suddenly showing you just how messy everything had become. I looked at myself and said something I hadn't said in weeks. I said my own name, not as a question, not as a complaint, but as a statement of fact. Michael. This is Michael. And Michael was going to have to decide whether to rot here or fight back. The choice seemed obvious when I put it like that. Rot or fight. Victim or warrior. Even if that warrior currently looked like he'd lost a fight with a washing machine, at least he was still standing. I didn't wake up the next morning with a detailed plan for rebuilding my life. I didn't suddenly have all the answers or feel ready to conquer the world. But I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I took a shower. A long, hot shower that washed away more than just dirt and disappointment. Then I looked in the mirror again, and this time I didn't look away. The guy staring back at me was still broken, still betrayed, still alone, but he was also still breathing, still thinking, still capable of making decisions. And the first decision was simple. I wasn't going to let their betrayal define the rest of my story. I wasn't going to spend the next 10 years explaining to people how my brother and my fiancée destroyed my life. I was going to write a new chapter where I was a hero, not the victim. It sounds cheesy saying it now, but in that moment, it felt like revolution. I didn't know where to start. I didn't have a job, a home, or a plan, but I knew one thing for certain. I was done being the guy who let life happen to him. I was going to become the guy who happened to life. Even if that guy currently looked like a homeless philosopher with trust issues. The road ahead looked impossible. Everything I had built had crumbled. Everyone I trusted had let me down. But sitting there in that crappy motel room, I made myself a promise. I was going to prove that the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting better. And I was going to get so much better that when people told this story, they'd forget about the betrayal and remember the comeback. I still didn't know how. But for the first time in weeks, I wanted to find out. And sometimes, wanting to fight back is enough to start the fight. The warrior was still in there somewhere, buried under all the disappointment and cheap bourbon. It was time to dig him out and see what he could do. The warrior was still in there somewhere, buried under all the disappointment and regret. It was time to dig him out and see what he could do. Making a plan sounds easier than it actually is when you're starting from absolute zero. No job, no home, no money, no connections, and emotional stability of a house of cards and a hurricane. But sometimes when you have nothing left to lose, you find the courage to risk everything. I started with the basics. When you're at rock bottom, there's only one direction to go: up. Either you pull yourself out or you stay there forever. And I'd had enough of forever feeling like failure. First job I found was delivering pizza. Not exactly glamorous, but it paid cash and didn't require explaining why I'd been unemployed for 2 months. I treated every delivery like I was transporting gold bars because I knew every dollar was a brick in the foundation of whatever I was going to build next. The pizza gig taught me something important. Pride doesn't pay rent. I'd gone from wearing suits to corporate meetings to wearing a polyester uniform that smelled like cheese and regret. But you know what? That uniform represented survival. It represented refusing to quit. My second job was helping out at a small IT company downtown. Nothing fancy. Basically tech support for people who thought the mouse was broken when they just run out of mousepad space. But it was a foot in the door, and doors were exactly what I needed. Working 2 jobs meant sleeping 3 hours a night if I was lucky. My body ached constantly, but my mind was sharp for the first time in months. Pain became my fuel, and betrayal became my most ruthless personal trainer. Every dollar I earned was proof that I wasn't a pathetic guy who'd let life happen to him anymore. The pizza delivery taught me about customer service under pressure. The IT job taught me about problem solving and technology. Both taught me that dignity isn't about what you do. It's about how well you do it. But I knew manual labor wasn't my endgame. Knowledge is power, and in my case, it was also going to be money. So while other people were watching Netflix after work, I was reading business books like they were murder mysteries, looking for clues about how to escape my personal recession. I devoured everything. Books about Wall Street, investment strategies, startup success stories, even failures that taught me what not to do. The public library became my second office, and YouTube became my free business school. Every day after my shifts, I'd sit in that library until closing time, taking notes on everything from basic accounting to advanced marketing strategies. I wanted to prove that I wasn't just some guy who could be thrown away like yesterday's newspaper. I wanted to prove that Michael could build something significant from nothing. Knowledge was my weapon, and I was loading up for war. Slowly but steadily, I started climbing. Each new contract at the IT company, each successful project was like oxygen for my suffocated spirit. I began tasting life again instead of just tasting regret and cheap fast food. The pizza job became a part-time thing, then a weekend thing, then just a memory. The IT position turned into a better IT position, which turned into a junior developer role at a bigger company. Every step felt like climbing Everest in flip-flops, but I was moving upward. By year 2 of my resurrection project, I'd save enough to move out of that motel and into an actual apartment. Nothing fancy, just a studio that came furnished with hope instead of despair. But it was mine, earned through sweat and stubbornness rather than inherited through family connections or relationship stability. Confidence started creeping back into my voice. I could look people in the eye again without feeling like they could see all my broken pieces. That's when the crazy idea hit me. I'd been developing software solutions for other people's problems, but I had an idea for solving a problem I'd noticed everywhere. Small businesses struggling with customer management systems that were either too complicated or too expensive. My idea was so insane it could either crash and burn spectacularly or change everything. But after what I'd been through, spectacular failure didn't scare me anymore. Staying safe and small scared me more. I started working on my startup idea nights and weekends, fueled by coffee that could strip paint and determination that could move mountains. Our first office was so small you could play hide and seek, but nobody would want to find you because there wasn't enough room to hide properly. My grandmother became my first client. She wanted a website for her knitting club. I joked that she was my first $1 million customer, but honestly, she believed in me when I barely believed in myself. Sometimes that's all you need to keep going. The early days were brutal. 16-hour days became normal. Ramen noodles became a food group. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. But every small victory felt like winning the lottery because I was building something that was mine, something nobody could take away or betray. Success isn't the absence of failure. It's the ability to get back up after every knockout punch. And I've been knocked down so hard that getting up felt like a superpower. The breakthrough came in year 4. My customer management software caught the attention of a mid-sized retail chain that was drowning in outdated systems. They were willing to pay serious money for a solution that actually worked instead of just existing. That contract led to another, which led to another. Word of mouth in the business world travels faster than gossip in a small town, and suddenly I had more clients than I could handle. At 34, 6 years after my world had imploded in a Chicago bedroom, I hit my first $1 million in revenue. Not profit yet, but revenue that represented something more valuable than money. It represented resurrection. The moment wasn't what I'd expected. No champagne, no celebration, no calling everyone I knew to brag. It was quiet recognition while sitting alone in my real office, looking at numbers on a screen that proved I'd survived the unsurvivable. That $1 million was revenge. It was testimony. Testimony that I'd built something meaningful from the ashes of betrayal. Testimony that I'd never again let anyone else define my worth or determine my future. The money was nice, but it was really a symbol of something more important. I'd taken control of my own story. Success changed things, but not in the ways I'd expected. I learned to enjoy simple pleasures again. Good coffee that I could afford, weekends that weren't spent in survival mode, clothes that fit properly instead of whatever was cheapest at the thrift store. Most importantly, I learned to let go of the burning anger I'd been carrying. Holding on to pain is like gripping a hot brick and hoping it burns someone else. It only burns you, and I was tired of being on fire. The hardest lesson was learning to open my heart again. Trust doesn't come back easily when it's been shattered by the people closest to you. It's like learning to walk again after a bad break. Every step feels uncertain, but you have to keep moving or you'll never heal. I knew that without love, life would be incomplete. Success without someone to share it with is just expensive loneliness. That's when I met Lisa at a business conference in San Francisco. She wasn't Olivia, which was exactly the point. Where Olivia had been flashy and unpredictable, Lisa was genuine and steady. Her laugh sounded like music instead of warning bells, and she looked at my scars as proof of strength rather than evidence of damage. She saw my story, not just my bank account. She understood that the man I had become was forged in fire, and she loved me because of that journey, not despite it. The proposal happened on a beach in California at sunset, like something from an old romantic comedy. But this time it was real. No hidden agendas, no secret betrayals, no family drama lurking beneath the surface. Just two people who both learned that love is a choice you make every day, not just a feeling that happens to you. Our wedding was small but genuine. No elaborate planning, no family politics, no stress about impressing people who didn't really matter. Just us, our closest friends, and promises we actually intended to keep. By this point, my relationship with my family had cooled to the temperature of polite strangers. They'd find my name in business articles sometimes and call with congratulations that felt more like obligation than pride. The conversations were civil but distant, like talking to acquaintances you used to know better. I'd hear occasional updates about David and Olivia through the family grapevine. Their fairy tale apparently wasn't aging as well as they'd hoped, but I'd stopped caring about their story. I was too busy writing my own. Building my new life had required cutting ties with the old one, not out of spite, but out of necessity. Some bridges you burn to keep yourself from going backward when moving forward gets difficult. I thought I'd close that chapter completely. New wife, new business, new city, new everything. The past felt like someone else's biography, interesting but irrelevant to my current existence. But life has a sense of humor about timing. Just when you think you've got everything figured out, just when you believe the past is truly behind you, that's exactly when it shows up uninvited to remind you that some stories have more chapters than you realized. I thought I was done looking backward. I was wrong about a lot of things back then, but I was especially wrong about that. The call would come on a Tuesday afternoon while I was reviewing quarterly reports, feeling satisfied with how far I'd traveled from that broken man in the motel room. Success had made me comfortable, maybe even a little complacent. I had no idea that everything I'd built was about to be tested in ways I never saw coming. But that's the thing about the past. It doesn't stay buried just because you stop digging it up. Sometimes the most important chapters are the ones you don't see coming until you're already living them. And sometimes the ghosts you think you've laid to rest are just waiting for the right moment to remind you that forgiveness is harder than success, but more important than revenge. I was about to learn that building a new life is only half the battle. The other half is making peace with the old one. I was wrong about a lot of things back then, but I was especially wrong about thinking the past would stay buried just because I'd stopped digging it up. 6 years into my new life, with everything finally feeling stable and secure, my phone rang with the kind of call that changes everything. It was an ordinary Wednesday morning, and I was deep in spreadsheets when I heard a voice I hadn't heard in years, shaky, distant, barely holding together. It was my mom, and the words she managed to get out hit me like a physical blow. Your father. 2 words that changed everything again. Despite everything that had happened between us, this was still my dad, the man who taught me to ride a bike, to cast a fishing line, to throw a curveball that actually curved. The same man who'd stayed silent when I needed him most, but who'd also been there for every little league game and school play. Now he was gone, and I was facing a choice I'd hoped never to make, whether to return to a place that held more painful memories than a battlefield. Lisa squeezed my hand when I told her. She didn't ask if we were going. She asked when we were leaving. That's when you know you found the right person. They don't run from your complicated history. They stand beside you while you face it. The drive back to my hometown felt like traveling through a time machine designed by someone with a cruel sense of irony. Every mile marker was a reminder of the life I'd left behind, the dreams that had died, the trust that had been shattered. Every street, every building was a scar on my heart. The town that had once been home now felt like a museum of my former naivety. But Lisa's presence made it bearable, like having an anchor in a storm of memories. She was my steady ground when everything else felt like quicksand. The funeral was at the same church where I'd planned to marry Olivia. The irony wasn't lost on me. Returned to the scene of my almost crime to say goodbye to the man who'd failed to defend me when it mattered most. When I stepped out of our car, I felt every eye in the parking lot turn toward me. The last time these people had seen me, I was a broken shell of a man fleeing his own life. Now I stood there in a tailored suit, successful and stable, with a beautiful wife who actually loved me. Some of them stared like I was a ghost. Others didn't even recognize the polished businessman as the devastated kid who'd run away with his tail between his legs. I could see them whispering, connecting the dots, realizing that little Michael had done more than just survive. The irony tasted better than I'd expected. Mom rushed toward me the moment she saw me, and suddenly I was 8 years old again, seeking comfort in her arms after a nightmare. Her tears were for Dad, yes, but also for us, for all the lost time, for all the conversations we'd never had. Her embrace felt the same as it had when I was little, when she could fix any problem with a hug and a Band-Aid. Some things never change, even when everything else does. That's when I saw them. David and Olivia stood near the church entrance like aged actors from an old drama that had closed years ago. Time hadn't been kind to either of them. David looked like his $1,000,000 dreams had turned into $1,000 debts, and Olivia appeared fragile, diminished, like a photograph left too long in direct sunlight. The spark that had once captivated me was gone, replaced by something that looked suspiciously like regret, wearing a cheap dress. They saw me at the same time I saw them, and the color drained from their faces like someone had unplugged their life force. Olivia's eyes went wide when she noticed my wedding ring, then shifted to Lisa with an expression I couldn't quite read. It was like watching people see the ghost of Christmas past, except I was a ghost, and I was doing just fine. Thank you very much. David approached first, moving like a student caught cheating on the final exam. He extended his hand, and I hesitated for a moment that felt like an eternity. Then I shook it. It wasn't a gesture of reconciliation. It was a gesture of closure, a period at the end of the sentence that had been hanging incomplete for too long. The funeral service was harder than I'd expected. Sitting in that church, listening to stories about Dad's life, I found myself caught between grief for what I'd lost and anger for what he'd failed to give me when I needed it most. But as the service progressed, something shifted. The pain from the betrayal started feeling distant, like an old injury that only aches when it rains. The love for my father, that felt permanent, unchanging, like a constant heartbeat beneath everything else. I could feel David and Olivia's eyes on me throughout the ceremony. But for the first time, their attention didn't make me angry. It made me feel something unexpected. Pity. They looked like two lost children who'd made a terrible mistake and never figured out how to fix it. That's when I realized the pain was gone. Not hidden, not suppressed, but actually gone. After the service, as people milled around sharing condolences and memories, David and Olivia approached me together. They looked nervous, like defendants waiting for a verdict. Their voices were broken when they spoke, their faces exhausted by years of carrying guilt they'd never known how to put down. They said they were sorry, that they'd been fools, that they'd regretted it every day since. I waited for the anger to come, for the old rage to resurface, for the desire for revenge to kick in, but there was nothing, just emptiness. And then, surprisingly, relief, like a massive weight I'd been carrying for years, had suddenly dissolved into air. What I said next surprised them more than it surprised me. I told them I'd forgiven them both a long time ago. The shock in their eyes was complete. Olivia started crying, not pretty tears, but the ugly, soul-deep sobs of someone finally facing the full weight of their choices. She whispered that they didn't deserve forgiveness. That's when I said something that changed everything for all of us. Forgiveness isn't about what you deserve. It's about what I deserve. The freedom that comes from not carrying your mistakes around like stones in my pockets. I'd learned that holding grudges is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to get sick. The conversation that followed was awkward but necessary. They told me about their struggles, their regrets, how their relationship had been built on such a foundation of guilt that it could never support real happiness. I found myself offering support, telling them that if they needed anything, I was there, not as a friend, not as family, but as someone who'd learned that helping others heal can be part of your own healing process. When I walked away from that conversation, I felt like I dropped a mountain from my shoulders. The past was finally truly in the past, and I was ready to move forward into whatever came next. But the biggest surprise was still waiting for me. While helping Mom clean out Dad's things, I found something that changed everything I thought I knew about our relationship. Hidden in his desk drawer was a cassette tape with my name written on the label in his careful handwriting. His voice on that tape was hoarse but calm, like he recorded it during one of his final days. He talked about his fears, his pride in my success, his regret at not standing up for me when it mattered most. He'd been following my career, reading about my business in trade magazines, bragging about me to his friends even though we hadn't spoken in years. He said he wanted to reach out to rebuild our relationship, but didn't know how to bridge the gap his silence had created. The tape was his attempt to build that bridge, even if he couldn't be there to walk across it with me. Hearing his voice, his genuine pride and love, completed a puzzle I didn't even know I was solving. This was the final piece, not just his love, but his belief in me. It mattered more than any $1 million contract or business success. My father had seen my resurrection and been proud of it, even from a distance. That discovery led to the most important conversation I'd had in years. I sat with Mom and told her I didn't want to lose any more family, that we'd all been through enough pain, and it was time to choose healing over hurt. She nodded through her tears and agreed. We decided to be a family again, a real family, built on forgiveness and second chances rather than obligation and politeness. Standing in that cemetery as we laid Dad to rest, I understood something profound about the nature of revenge and success. The best revenge isn't getting even with people who wronged you. The best revenge is becoming so happy that their past actions become irrelevant to your present joy. Money gives you freedom, but it doesn't give you happiness. Happiness is a choice. It's the ability to forgive, to let go, and to live fully as who you are, not who circumstances try to make you. My life had been like a roller coaster, terrifying drops that seemed endless, followed by exhilarating climbs that took your breath away. But I'd learned the most important lesson of all. You can't control what happens to you, but you can control how you respond to it. And how you respond to it determines everything. Walking away from that cemetery, hand in hand with Lisa, I felt the autumn sun breaking through the clouds. It wasn't just sunshine, it was the light of a new beginning. My new beginning. Not because I'd gotten revenge on the people who hurt me, but because I'd learned to build something better from the wreckage they'd left behind. My story isn't unique. Betrayal, loss, struggle, and recovery happen to millions of people. But what makes any story worth telling isn't the pain you experience. It's what you build from that pain. I don't wish what happened to me on anyone, but I hope my story gives someone hope. Hope that even when everything seems finished, it might just be the beginning of something real, something better, something true. The $1 million business was nice. The success felt good. But the real victory was learning that forgiveness sets you free in ways that revenge never can. The real victory was discovering that the best chapters of your life can be written after the worst things happen to you. Some people measure success in dollars. Others measure it in achievements or recognition. But I learned to measure it in peace. The peace that comes from knowing you survived something that should have destroyed you and came out stronger on the other side. That's the kind of wealth that nobody can take away from you. As Lisa and I drove away from my hometown for what I knew would be the last time in a long while, I felt something I hadn't experienced since before that terrible day when I found them together. I felt complete, not because everything had been fixed or everyone had been punished, but because I'd finally learned the difference between being a victim and being a survivor. The past had taught me everything I needed to know about resilience, about rebuilding, about the power of refusing to let other people's choices define your future. But the future? That was mine to write, one choice at a time. And I was just getting started. My life became proof that even the deepest betrayal can become the catalyst for something greater. That the worst day of your life might just be the beginning of the best years of your life. That's the bet I made on myself when I decided to fight back instead of giving up. And friends, that turned out to be the best wager I ever placed. I won it all.